Analysis, Research and Extension departments there. A lot of experience in the beef cattle business, has supervised the purebred cows at KSU, long time experience there in Extension, currently serves as the Executive Director of the Beef Improvement Federation. And Dr. Weber's topic you can see in your program is what we kick off this afternoon with: selection and mating, breed complementarity, and heterosis. Bob, thanks for joining us. It's all yours, friend.
Great. Well, excuse me. Thank you, and thanks, Mark, and your organizing committee for the invitation to be on the program again. I really enjoyed the conference here last year. I thought it was really thought-provoking and provided a great forum for discussion. And that's what I really hope, as we work through the next couple of days of program, is that we have that sort of translational bit of the meeting, the kind of classic hall talk and bar talk about the ideas that are here, and how do we mesh those into our daily lives and production systems. Jack, I also really appreciated your initial comments on our cow herd and our current market situation. I tend to agree with you. I think we're permanently smaller, at least for the next probably decade. And that changes our perspective on what we do in the cow-calf sector, I think, and certainly in the feedlot and fed cattle space as well. So I'm not the economist of the two Weber brothers, so I'll leave that whole part of the discussion to dear brother Dave, but I think it has important context for our business. Bray, if you would go to the next slide, please. So mine's just touching keeping me on teleprompt, because I could talk about the topic I'm about to talk about for the whole afternoon. So I'm going to stay on point. But I do want to invite everybody to the BIF meeting that's coming up. If you enjoy today's discussion and you're really passionate about making more environmentally and production adapted cows, our BIF conference in Knoxville, Tennessee, here in just a few short weeks is focused entirely around that topic, and we've already had near record registration for that event. We would love to host you there in Knoxville. One of the things that is obvious to all of y'all in the audience, and both Mark and Jack alluded to this, is the segmentation components of our business and our inability oftentimes to effectively communicate across the value chain about different aspects of our production system and certainly profitability to help us make optimal decisions. And so, I'm an animal breeder. From a genetic improvement standpoint, we like to talk about selection index and those breeding objectives as a method to do that. But there's a much broader need in our business to do a better job coordinating our production system. And I think a lot of that falls back onto the idea of sustainability. And so genetics play a really key component in the sustainability of our business, and we've known that for decades, obviously. But I think it's really important we kind of revisit that idea and think about the things under control in our production system that we can manipulate and perturb to make the system more efficient and make it better. And certainly, Bray, if you'd go to the next slide, please. We want to make sure that, and I thought this was a great definition of beef sustainability. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us in the audience and around this venue to talk about sustainability and what it means. I thought Rory Peter, maybe Bray, if you'd go a couple of slides ahead. There we go. The idea that we want to produce beef today in such a way that it doesn't limit our opportunity to produce beef in the future. And I thought that was a pretty kind of had some altruism to it, but also a lot of flexibility for us to adapt our own production circumstance around this concept of sustainability. I like to come at this question, and Bray, if you would go to the next one, please. From an efficiency standpoint, and I agree with Jack's comment about we've got to do more with less. and in the beef production world, there are a key set of efficiencies that we need to evaluate and understand. And so if you're not super comfortable with these ideas, I'd encourage you to spend some time and get comfortable with them, because at the core of improvements in sustainability, at least as I think about it, is improvement in efficiency. If we want to adjust or change methane intensity from our industry, one of the best ways to do it is have more output with a constant amount of methane emission, right? We can decrease methane, but certainly if we improve the amount of product we get out of the system, that changes those intensity measures in our favor, okay? And it also tells our consumer we care, right? And I think that's a really important part of the messaging here. The other piece is that although there's all kinds of really cool, innovative things going on in the sustainability space in our business, it's not unuseful to step back and think about what are all the key production practices that we have in our system that we've known about and used for decades that improve efficiency. Okay? I'm not talking about gee whiz, rocket science, put somebody on Saturn kind of stuff. Okay, I'm talking about things we can do in an everyday, really practical and repeatable method that improves not only the sustainability and environmental impact of our business, but most certainly the profitability of our business as well, which I view as a key component to sustainability. As I think about our own family's operation and those I work with around Kansas and the country, if those businesses, and they're independent businesses and they have lots of independent thought, I promise you, if they're not profitable, they're not sustainable, okay? They don't get to control the land moving forward, and it's land ownership and resource ownership and resource management that helps us as an industry improve sustainability. Okay, next slide, please. I also believe that cattle are part of our sustainability solution, and I promise you I will get to crossbreeding in just one second. I've been thinking about this topic a fair bit recently, and I want us to, as producer groups, to start having more dialogues that help us get in the sustainability lexicon. We need to use the right words internally in our internal audiences to talk about various concepts, but we also need to be able to talk to our consumers, legislators, and others about how and what we do in our business, okay? And so one of the things I want to make sure that we do is get that language built and talk about the key things that our particular product, beef, does better than any other livestock species. And that is convert inedible foodstuffs to a really high quality, nutritious, wholesome product. Okay? Not to feed just the people here in the United States, but feed people around the world. And I think everybody in this room obviously cares about that because they're here, right? And Mark, your comment about those that show up get to make the decisions, right? I think that's true, and I applaud you all for taking time out of your schedule to be here and be around the discussion and help us make decisions about how we move sustainability forward. And so I really look forward to our discussion later this afternoon around some of those topics more specifically. One of the key things to recognize here, obviously, is that genetic improvement and adaptation of our cows to our production environment plays a very central role in sustainability, not only from the environmental impact those cows have in our system, but also the amount and kind of product that they move into the value chain. And we have two principal sources of control for those genetics that affect adaptability and product quality and productivity of our cows. And you guys, I'm preaching to the choir a bit here, right? There's two sources of genetic variation. There's additive genetics. That's the stuff we use EPDs and selection indexes to describe. It's the piece that's transmitted from parent to offspring, okay? We spend a lot of time in our business on that genomics, selection index, EPDs, all that stuff to get at that component. We've spent markedly less time in the next area over the last decade or two talking about the value of non-additive genetic components in our production system as they affect phenotypes that drive productivity and production and efficiency in our system. And those non-additive effects, that's the science word, right, are hybrid vigor, heterosis, crossbreeding that develop genetic opportunity for us as cow-calf producers, and one that we need to be very focused on. Okay? Bray, if you'd go to the next slide, please. one of the key components of this idea of the genetics bit is that if we make genetic improvement, and you all know this, from an additive perspective, it's additive, it's cumulative over time, right? We make selective progress. As long as we keep using the tools and monitoring our genetic improvement, we get to keep that, okay? That's true for the additive space. The non-additive space is trickier, right? It requires that we have very thoughtful and planned out mating systems to optimally combine genetics from different breeds to exploit heterosis or heterotic effects, okay? We don't get that within breed. We don't get that from selecting different lines within breed, blah, blah. We got to put breeds together to make this work, okay? And there's certainly differences in those combinations, both from an additive perspective and non-additive, but shouldn't be surprising to you all. We have lots of data around this space. I see many of us in the audience are my age or maybe my parents' generation. Lots of young folks too. I see them up here. Back in the 70s and 80s, what happened in Clay Center, Nebraska? Well, it's actually still going on today. Germplasm evaluation, germplasm utilization projects, right? Designed to describe the differences in additive merit amongst major U.S. and imported beef breeds, and also explore the value and opportunities for exploitation of heterotic effects, okay? And there's probably not a topic in beef cattle genetics that has more data in the 1970s and early 80s than the application of breeding systems for heterosis effects. So the names like Cook, Cundiff, Dickerson, others, pioneers in this space, trying to understand the underlying genetic mechanisms that let us extrapolate additional value from complementary breed matings, okay? So as we think about, well, how do we, and what value does heterosis and crossbreeding have to our business, you can tell I've honestly made a pretty reasonable career out of giving crossbreeding talks. I got to be honest with you, okay? I didn't have to make too many new slides for today's presentation, which is both, it's good for me because I didn't have to expend, 8 hours of slide creation, but also a little bit of a sort of a mental check for me, right? Like my colleague Matt Spangler's in the same boat at the University of Nebraska. We've given hundreds of these talks. Why do we keep giving hundreds of these talks, right? There's interest in the topic. Sometimes deployment and adoption is slow, okay? And part of that, I think, challenge comes from this idea that crossbreeding's not easy, okay? It's not, and it's not for everybody. I don't want you guys to leave the room today and go, well, Weber said crossbreeding's for everybody. I don't believe that to be the case. In fact, there's particular situations where it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. Maybe wrong thing from a genetic perspective, maybe the wrong thing from a managerial perspective, maybe the wrong thing from a profit perspective. Those cases aren't many, but they're out there, okay? So the key thing is we think about genetic improvement, and I cast this under the idea of sire selection often, is we got to make sure our breeding system is right first. And that means, what is our plan, right? Planning is essential in this exercise, and certainly aligned to not only our own marketing objectives, but the aid of the marketing and production of product down chain from us. So not being really narrow focused in what it is we do, but making sure we produce a valuable product that serves our industry. And then the second step is the one, we spend all of our time. It's the fun thing to do, go through the bull sale catalog, go look at the bulls, go to the auction, all that stuff, have the sandwich and cold beer afterwards. That's the fun part, right? But it's also the easy part. And unfortunately, sometimes it's also not the profitable part, right? So spending time, as my former professor, Dr. Bob Taylor, said, take the time to do the $500 an hour work instead of the $5 an hour work, okay? Make sure you get the homework and the planning done to make this work, okay? One of the questions that often comes up in this discussion is, well, how do I choose the right breeding program? And sometimes my response is, well, how the hell do I know, right? It all depends on a lot of particular circumstances of an individual operation. So there's not a one-size-fits-all solution here, and I think our panel will help illustrate that here in just a little bit. And one of the key things is to think about, and our industry is famous for focusing on revenues and premiums in the marketplace as proxies for profit. okay? And it turns out they're pretty bad proxies for profit, okay? We can go down a road of chasing premiums in the market space that somebody else has defined, and I'm talking principally about cow-calf producers here. Somebody else has defined that objective to get us to move that way, right? And that's fine, right? We've made lots of industry improvement from those kind of motivations. But it's also very easy then to lose sight of the underpinning economic drivers in our own production circumstance if we don't monitor those well. And Dr. Peel, I think you'll agree with me, as an industry, particularly at the commercial cow-calf level, we're not very good accountants, right? And we're maybe even worse managerial accountants, okay? And so I want to encourage us to think about how do we actually go back and think about improvements, not just in sustainability, but improvements in profit, okay? I don't know about you all, but I got a little set of cows, and it's a lot more fun when they make money, okay? It's a lot more fun when they make money, and I suspect for many of you that is true as well. So some of the things to think about is, are you profit or premium focused? My argument is be both, right? But don't leave out the focus on profit. Herd size obviously plays a huge role here, not only in which system makes sense, maybe more importantly, which systems don't make sense, okay? So if you're a small producer and have 10 cows, it might be really complicated for you to have a really sophisticated 3-breed, rototerminal, whatever, crossbreeding. It doesn't make any sense, okay? If you have cows in 800 cow units and you've got 4 or 5 of them, is it easy to put a certain breed of bull with each different group of cows and move the heifer calves to the right group? Yeah, it's fall down easy, right? So scale matters in this particular exercise, as does the ability to generate replacement females. Do you build those internally? If you do, you've got to think about, how do I keep a market or a environmentally adapted cow, and then mate the female to bulls that drive value into the marketplace. If you purchase replacements, this can be an easier exercise, and again, a bit size dependent, right? If you're a small producer, it might be easy to go down the road and buy 2 F1 whatever heifers to bring back into my operation and run a terminal bull. It might be real easy, and it's really effective, okay? How do you market calves, right? What your marketing endpoint is determines not only what breeds you might use, but what that system looks like, okay? And obviously the fun part to think about, what are the constraints to this system, right? And I like to think about breeding and genetics as a system, okay? And it's part of this broader production circumstance we find ourselves in cow-calf production and ranching. And environment is certainly one of those that plays a big role, fluctuation in environment. So that adaptation role is really important for our cows to be productive. And also management, right? You a full-time guy with three employees that help run the ranch, or you got a day job like me in town and the cows are nights and weekend work, okay? Be honest, right? There's no judgment in going, I'm going to do something that works for me. That's fine, okay? In fact, that's what we should do, because the things that work well for us, we do repeatedly, right? I just want to make sure that we have a realistic view of opportunities, okay? So one of the, and this is Bob's profound statement of the day, why crossbreed, right? Well, the 2 motivators are improvement and profit potential, okay, and reduction in headache, okay? And we'll talk about some of the traits and how they align with these 2 perspectives. As many of you in the audience know me, I like to keep things pretty simple. The other piece here is the idea that we can live in a really happy space of animal breeding and genetics if we get our brain around the idea of both the additive component or using EPDs and selection index, which arguably I think our commercial producers are getting very, very good at. They understand, by and large, the value of genomics and those tools. We need to help coach them some more in the idea of how do we make selection that's fit and adapted to their production environment. And part of that comes to the idea that, in the commercial sector, it's phenotypes that pay the bills, right? So it's this combination of the management we apply and the genetics that we have in play that determine the product that we produce. And when I say genetics, I mean additive and non-additive genetics, right? So those things all interact together to make a particular set of phenotypes in cows and calves. And the reality then is that because those things interact with each other, we have to focus and have some control on all of them, okay? One of the real beauties of, and this is, again, a little bit speaking to the choir, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page, where the real opportunity lies in exploitation of crossbreeding and heterosis effects, okay? And as this table lays out, there's three categories of traits on the left column: reproduction, growth, and carcass, okay? Heritability is the middle column. Of course, we all know that reproductive traits in beef cattle, at least on the big scale, are lowly heritable, which means that environment plays a significant role. And heritability here, I'm using narrow sense heritability, so it's the additive bit. If we think about the inclusion of the genetic effects in heritability, it's what we would call broad sense heritability, actually fertility goes up, right, in heritability perspective because of the non-additive effects. And we'll talk about those specifically here in just a minute. But from a regular kind of narrow using EPDs to improve heritability for reproduction is low. Growth traits moderate and carcass high. The last column is the impact or effect of heterosis on those three trait categories. And what do you notice about them? They're inverted, right? So heritability of reproduction is low, but the heterosis effect is high. On the opposite end, carcass traits, heritability is relatively high. Carcass effect, or heterosis effect, just call it 0. Okay, we'll just concede that, okay? Does that provide opportunity for us? Yeah, what's the most, if you're a cow-calf producer, what is the most important thing that happens on your place every year? Cows get bred. It's the most important thing. I think so. I think the data supports that, okay? Having an opportunity to affect the fertility of my cow herd from not just the environmental perspective, because we can manipulate the environment a fair bit, right? Feed bucket changes fertility. We know that, okay? But non-additive genetics also change fertility in a favorable way, and heterosis and hybrid vigor is a way to leverage that. And so the power of this crossbreeding system then comes really from two sources. One is the ability to leverage heterosis, particularly maternal heterosis, and we'll talk about why that's important in just a moment, and then breed complementarity, okay? Contrary to a popular belief, there's not one breed or set of breeds that does everything perfectly, okay? We can combine breeds together in a thoughtful way to make a product that exceeds the sum of the parts that went into it, okay? You've probably all heard that saying before, the sum's greater than the parts, okay? Crossbreeding is a way to do that. Now, can we just put anything together and make it work? Can we put the Ford V8 engine in with the Chrysler four-cylinder design transmission? No. Right? We got to be thoughtful in how we do this. And fortunately, there's a lot of data out there that talks about, again, back to the Meat Animal Research Center, data that's routinely updated and provides us a contemporary look at the genetic merit of a variety of breeds. Okay? This next slide is maybe the most important one in my talk, and I just want to make sure, yep, it is the right one. The value of heterosis comes from really, if we can think about it, there's three potential routes: individual, maternal, and paternal heterosis. Okay, I've left paternal off here. It's important, but it's third on the list by a stretch. Okay, but if we think about the contribution of heterosis effects, we can divide them up into the ability or improvement of a beef cow from being crossbred, or the performance and improvement in a calf. That would be individual heterosis. So Tom Jenkins put together a nice slide. I actually got this at a BIF meeting, I don't know, probably in 1997 or 98, somewhere around there. And I remember Tom was up giving a talk on GPE stuff and GPU, and he had this slide, and it's a summary of the Meat Animal Research Center data and identifies the change in weaning weight per cow exposed, or beef cow efficiency in the cow-calf level, isolated to these two different sources of heterosis. Okay, and so the left column here is 0. So if we've got straight bred cows, that's par money, right? If we have crossbred calves born, so we use another breedable on those straight bred cows, we get about an 8 or 9% improvement in weaning weight per cow exposed. And that's driven primarily by increased efficiency and growth performance of those calves, and a slight improvement in survivability and health. Okay. If you go to the last column, you'll notice the yellow bar has a green bar stacked on top of it that's arguably quite a bit better, or quite a bit bigger. And that's the contribution of maternal heterosis to improvement in weaning weight per cow exposed. In fact, about just short of 2/3 of the economic benefit of crossbreeding comes from having crossbred cows. Okay, that's maybe the most important point you take from my talk today is 2/3 of the economic benefit of crossbreeding comes from crossbred cows. Okay, which unfortunately means then that should be the focus of our effort in crossbreeding. Okay, the bad news is that's also the most complicated bit. Okay, but I'm going to show you some data here in a second that I hope makes you think it's worth it, because 2/3 is a big number. Okay, but remember, maternal heterosis is really important in this system. Okay, advantages of the crossbred cow. We're just going to quickly work through these. You guys have seen these over and over and over in industry talks. Improvement in the cow side, longevity about 1.3 years, and this is sourced from Cundiff and Gregory's data from Meat Animal Research Center. About a 16% improvement in longevity. Cow lifetime production. Those crossbred cows, F1 cows, produce roughly one more calf than their straight bred counterparts in their productive life. Okay, that's about a 17% improvement, so those would be about 6 calf cows. Cumulative weaning weight, and mind you, this was data from the 80s and 90s, or excuse me, the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. About 600 pounds of additional cumulative weaning weight per crossbred cow in her lifetime. Okay. That lines up pretty good with one more calf, right? Individual calf heterosis, calving rate about a 3.2% improvement, survival to weaning about 1.5%, a little bit increase in birth weight. Remember, birth weight is a growth component, or a snapshot of growth at that particular age. Weaning weight, about a 16-pound increase, or about 4%. So you can kind of chalk up the growth improvements about 4% across the suite of traits. That's in Bos Taurus crosses. Of course, many of you in the room know if we interject Bos indicus into that system, they are very genetically divergent from Bos Taurus breeds. Generally about a 2.5 to 3-fold increase in the amount of heterosis we observe. So this is Don Franke data from LSU. Improvements in calving rate here, about 15% relative to straight British or Bos Taurus cows in this particular circumstance. Calf survival goes up, weaning rate goes up, about a 31% improvement in weaning weight per cow exposed in the Bos indicus system. Okay, weaning rate, in the individual heterosis here. I don't have my old man glasses on, so seeing this screen looking that way is harder. Calving rate about 4%. Calving assistance actually goes up a little bit. If you know anything about Brahman genetics, you'll know why. This diallele has a different control in calf size and gestation, but improvements nonetheless in terms of growth performance. Okay, you all have seen that ad nauseum in your lives, and so we won't spend a lot of time on it. What I think is more impactful is to think about how do those, particularly in the calf side, small changes in performance, and on the cow side, arguably I think larger changes, particularly on the fertility side, manifest themselves into opportunity that we can exploit. Okay. One of the ways this happens, and this is a simple profit equation here, we've got revenues and costs. We'll talk through an example. Application of a structured crossbreeding system can increase revenues and decrease costs. And you're probably all on the edge of your seat going, that's fantastic, that sounds great, right? That's how we drive, right? One of the ways to improve profit is, we can keep costs constant, increase revenue, right? Keep revenue the same, decrease costs, or push them both the opposite direction, okay? Crossbreeding pushes them the opposite directions, okay? Think about cow longevity, for example. We showed a slide earlier, increased productive life of those beef cows, okay? If I have cows that last longer in my productive system because they reproduce, do I need more or fewer replacement heifers over time? I need fewer, right? If I've got constant herd size, cows don't cull themselves because they're bred, right? If they're bred, we keep them, typically, okay? Two things happen here, right? I kept less replacement heifers, which means more heifers went where? To town, right? They went with their steer mates somewhere else, okay? They generated revenue, okay? That same decision point also decreased cost, right? If you go and look in much of the production data, production economic data in cow-calf enterprises, the replacement heifer exercise is the single biggest cost center, okay? Well, I just took replacement heifers out of that pen, right, effectively. So net cost to replacement female generation, and I hope after a while, Mr. Maddox talks about cow depreciation. I have less depreciation in my cow herd because of that, okay? So heterosis has had this positive impact in two directions. And there's lots of other examples that we can point to. Am I doing okay on time? Oh, again, I got the wrong glasses on, 1:18. Okay. Some of you may have seen this before. I've recently updated. I've said for quite a few years, I should really update that slide. So I did it yesterday, and it was a little shocking. So I've checked the math more than once on this. And it's a little tabletop example, and I like these sort of little partial budget exercises to kind of help get the thinking right around different farm business management topics. So we use them a lot in our extension programs. And this is one I actually developed when I was on faculty at the University of Missouri. And it's a simple example of I would say, a modest-sized cow herd. Okay, so 100 cows. I did this when I worked in Missouri, and Missouri's, as a production system has some challenges. So we used the data we had at that point in time said about an 80% weaning rate. So that's of cows exposed to bulls. We wean about 0.8 calves off that set of cows, the following roughly 2 years. Okay, maybe a little low for if you go in the NOMS data today, but it doesn't effectively change the numbers much if we move that up just a little bit. Okay, calves average 575 weaning weight, and we're going to look at a 10-year time horizon. So what impact if we got a set of 100 cows that are straight bred versus 100 cows that are in an F1 terminal sire, sort of maximize the heterosis opportunity here, system, sell all the calves. Okay, so this doesn't have any replacement heifer stuff in it. It also is only the heterosis part, right? This doesn't talk about the advantage. I could make this number, I think, markedly larger with some really good sire selection decisions about what breeds and what merit within those breeds I apply. Okay, so capturing the additive components more effectively. This is only the heterosis effects. Okay, it's not any of that stuff. It's just the heterosis effects. Okay, so all the disclaimers are off now. So if we take the calf survival to weaning, that literature, if we do the cow, the maternal, and the individual, that's about a 6% improvement in calf survival to weaning. So that's from conception forward. That's about 48 head of calves over that 10-year time frame. Okay, so not quite a potload of 5-weight calves, but nearing that. Okay. Weaning weight, remember I said growth is about 4%, so this is the individual component. It's about 18,400 pounds of calf weight. That's just the individual calf bit. The maternal part's also about 4%, so we could double that number, okay? Weaning weight per cow exposed. Literature from Meat Animal Research Center says about a 24% improvement in weaning weight per cow exposed in this kind of system, okay? And mind you, that's in a production center. Who's been to Clay Center? I know there's at least one person in the audience been to Clay Center, right? In the GPE, GPU projects, are those cows in a nutrient sparse or nutrient dense production environment? Okay, it's designed to get animals to express the maximum amount of genetic difference they might possess, phenotypically. It's a fairly nutrient dense environment. And because of that, then the heterosis estimates in the literature are actually smaller than what we often see in production circumstance. So this 24, I would say is a relatively conservative number. If you go into parts of the desert Southwest, for example, this number can be markedly bigger. I guess it's 23% on the slide. But if you do the math, the straight-bred cows here produce about 460,000 pounds of total calf weight, weaning weight. The crossbred cows would produce about 106,000 additional, okay? So if you do the math here in equivalencies, that's 18 more 575-pound calves per year equivalent, okay? A reasonably big number. If you do the math of the value of that additional weight, okay, and maybe Dr. Peel will set me different. I sought counsel, and that counsel said to use market price, not value of gain price in this, because we're describing only revenue components. So I went yesterday and looked up the last week's report from Oklahoma City for 5-weight calves. Anybody know what number one 5-weight calf sold for last week in Oklahoma City? $3, right on the dot. So I said, well, I'm kind of conservative. Let's bank on a different number. So I went down the page 2 times and said, let's pretend we don't even do a really good job in what color we make them, how pretty they are. So I used the price for number 2s, okay? And that's $275 a 100, okay? If you do that and do this math, the heterosis component is worth $290 per cow per year. It's not per calf. Okay, it's per cow per year, okay? Who thinks that's a big number? In profit for cow-calf producers, it's a huge number, right? I promise you I've checked this math 8 ways to Sunday, okay? And we can argue if you want to use market price or the value of gain, whatever. It's still a big number, okay? Mind you, I hadn't updated this slide in probably, well, it was pre-COVID. What was the calf price I had in it for 5 weights? It was $1.50. Okay, and at $1.50, the heterosis bit is worth about 150, 160 bucks per cow. Okay, so once in a while, people will say, "Well, we got these great calf prices. We don't need heterosis." Is that the dumbest thing you've ever heard? Really, you don't want to make more money when prices are good? Okay, so good times, bad times, heterosis works. Okay, another way to think about this is, if I've got straight-bred calves, how much more valuable do they have to be? How many more dollars per head do I have to capture in the market space to have the 2 systems equal? Okay, does everybody get the flip in the perspective? Okay, so the denominator here is not the pounds of calf produced from the crossbred cows, it's the pounds of calf produced by the straight-bred cows. Okay, so the numbers got to get bigger because I made less of them, they didn't perform as well, they didn't survive as well, they weren't as efficient. Okay, so those straight-bred calves have to generate $363 a head to make the system equal, okay? If you do that on a break-even basis, if I did the math right, that's about 63 cents a pound or $63 a hundredweight. If you think about it, and I'm certainly not naive enough to think that people don't sell cattle on the grid, like retain ownership and push them clear to the end. Well, what's the trade-off there, right? The straight-bred calves have to generate, on average, a $40 a hundredweight carcass premium to be equal. That's not the best ones, every single one, okay? So I want to go back to, remember at the very beginning, I said 2/3 of the economic value of crossbreeding comes from crossbred cows. If you think back, and I had a slide and I cut it out. It was an old Gordon Dickerson slide that was an expression, a linear expression of cow-calf production efficiency, okay? What's the number one way or the easiest way to change cow-calf efficiency? Is it to change the weight of the calves or change the number of the calves? It's the number of the calves, okay? And because of the fertility aspects of crossbreeding, we can change this number, and not surprising, as it moves through the system, because of the increased value as you move along from, say, a weaned calf to a yearling to a fed steer, that impact amplifies, right? I mean, how much is a fed steer worth hanging on the rail that's a prime yield grade 2? I don't want to have to write that check, right? It's worth a lot. Okay, and so making sure we get those cattle through the system is really important, and making sure we get them born and on the ground is step number one. Okay. Clay Mathis at NCBA, Cattlemen's College, was one of the keynote speakers at the luncheon, and did a great talk, as Clay always does. And embedded in that talk was a couple of tidbits. One was a specific call out for crossbreeding and heterosis, which I was like, yes, right? Animal breeder gets excited. The other one was an introduction of an idea, and it's worded a little bit more in the sort of business language than what we usually use in the beef space or the ag econ space, at least in my experience. And that's the idea of contribution margin, okay? And it's the revenue less fixed cost. Okay, and so there's a chunk of money left from if you add one unit, so I either think about one cow or one calf to our production system, how much does that additional critter contribute to either profit or margin that we can deploy to other uses? So, fixed costs would be one of those. But this idea of contribution margin, and heterosis or crossbreeding is a great way to start thinking and using that idea, because back again to this idea, if we put one more calf in the system, how does that change farm level profitability, right? Versus adding 10 pounds of weaning weight or 2% more choice carcasses, right? Adding one more calf has a huge impact on the P&L, okay? As we wrap up here, there's a couple of things, and if somebody came for, I need this specific details on a crossbreeding system, I'm happy to chat with you later. I did not put any of those slides in, okay? Well, they're at the end of the talk after the thank you, okay? Those are real context-specific sort of discussions. I'm glad to have those. I'm here through probably lunch tomorrow. Welcome those conversations. Some guiding principles, though, I think are really important, okay? As you think about your breeding system, how do you optimize? Okay, notice this is optimize, not maximize. Optimize heterosis, okay? For some producers, that might be I capture half of the heterosis available to me. For some producers, it might be zero, okay? So it's optimize, not maximize, okay? Calf and maternal heterosis. How do I utilize breed complementarity to build environmentally adapted cows and market-targeted calves, okay? And I think that's another thing to think about in this whole exercise is, if we want crossbred cows, let's make those the best crossbred cows for our production environment we can, and make a mating decision to those females to produce as highly valuable and sought after market product, the calf product, as we possibly can, okay? Think about ways to minimize variation in progeny phenotype by stabilizing breed inputs or sorting calf outputs, okay? This is the advice to don't repeat the 1980s, okay? The rainbow crossbreeding system that happened down the road from the ranch I grew up on, we do not need to repeat, okay? That was a different breed of bulls every 2 years, okay? Don't do that, okay? Have a plan, be structured. I had the opportunity to grow up in a very structured crossbreeding system, okay? Think about creative ways to use advanced reproductive technology to implement your crossbreeding system, right? We have some really fabulous tools available to us in AI and gender sort semen to build really high quality replacement females, okay? And if you go into the literature, and particularly if you read some of Harlan Ritchie's work, he points out that in many of these systems, the drag in the system is the maternal steers, okay? The steers that come out of building the replacement female part of the cycle. Just don't make them, right? Use gender sort semen, okay? So crossbreeding done right. Build a plan, set attainable goals. Again, the considerations. And if you come ask me about what system's going to work for you, I'm going to ask you these 4 questions, so be ready, okay? What's your marketing endpoint? Do you build your own replacement females? What environment do you live in? And certainly, what's your tenacity in terms of management to implement said system? And that's the stick to it bit here at the end. I want to jump a couple of slides here because I want to get to this, okay? Our business has had a mentality that we can build, and I'm a seed stock breeder too, so I'm guilty as anybody, that we can build one bull that does everything that fits all the slots in our business, okay? I think that might have been true in the 1960s or 70s. I promise you, well, my belief is that's not true today, okay? Our system is evolved far enough that it is really difficult to maximize the value of a beef carcass and take his sister home and make a cow out of her and be happy with her, like for a long time. Okay, not just like when you unload her off the trailer, like 6 years from now, I want you to be happy with it. That's really hard to do. Okay, there are simpler ways to do that. Certainly, the one breed thing and one bull thing, you fight all the antagonism that exists in our system, especially if you sell cattle on the rail and keep your own replacement heifers. That's the hardest grid to live in, or hardest space. You give up a lot. I know, Mark, you got some background in the pig business, right? No. You coached a judging team with pigs. You were good at it, though. But what's the swine industry? Do they have one breed of boar or one composite of boars that does everything? No, right? They got a line that produces gilts to make sows out of that are adapted to that system. They mate those sows to terminal boars to make an end product. Why don't we do that in the beef business? Why don't we get really focused on making awesome cows and making awesome feeder cattle using 2 different sets of bulls? There's no law against it, at least not in Kansas. Yep. Yeah. So I want us to think about that. I mean, there's a real opportunity for our business to start, at least conceptually, separating the maternal and terminal mating decisions, okay? And, hats off, there's lots of big ranches in the United States. Guess what? They've been doing this all along, right? They've got some kind of rototerminal mating system. There's a group of cows that get mated to bulls that produce replacement heifers. And there's another group of cows that get mated to bulls. Everything goes to town. Why do they do it? Because it works and it makes money. Okay? It works and it makes money. But there's a broader opportunity for us in the business to not only think about how do we do that at the commercial level, but certainly as seed stock producers, how do we start to think about producing bulls that go out and make great cows, okay? And let another group of bulls go out and make great feeder and fed cattle, okay? Those can live on the same operation. I'm not saying you got to pick one or the other, but let's do a better job separating where those are going and what they look like, right? 170 weaning weight, 190, whatever the number is, yearling weight genetics in southeast Colorado where I grew up with cow mature weight EPD over 100. She looks real pretty as a heifer. She looks real skinny as a 3-year-old. Okay? And I don't care what breed it is. Pick the breed. Okay? If they have that much growth and performance, they outstrip the nutrient environment for most production environments. Okay? Let's start to have the discussion about how do we optimize these 2 very divergent production objectives, right? Because they are very, very divergent. And I think, given, and Jack, I think you agree, the market signal we're getting is make them even more divergent, right? Anybody that thinks we're going to put a cap on carcass weight at 1,000 pounds again anytime soon, just go talk to whichever packer you want, because I don't think it's coming, okay? In fact, if you don't push them to close to 1,000, you've missed market opportunity, right? Because they're worth $300 a hundredweight on the rail, okay? I'll get off my soapbox. I am delighted again, Mark, to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to our panel discussion.